Hello everyone. In this video I am going to show you a game played between the world chess champion Liren and Praggnanandhaa Rameshbabu, a grandmaster, a teenager from India. And this game is played in Tata Steel Chess Masters in round 4. Without any further ado, let's get into the game. And this game is sensational. Liren is playing with the white pieces and Praggnanandhaa is playing with the black pieces, and Liren opens the game with pawn to e4 and responds with pawn to e5. Knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5, the Spanish or the Ruy Lopez. And Prague plays a6, the Morphy's defense, bishop to a4, knight to f6, and d3. The main line goes castles, and black has a lot of options like bishop to e7 and or bishop to c5 with more aggressive gameplay, or even the main line, the open Spanish is knight takes e4, and yeah, so these are the options for black. But Ding says pawn to d3 and keeps the game solid. So this creates a impregnable fortress for white so that black cannot easily enter and attack. Prague develops the bishop to c5, white castles, and b5, asking the bishop to retreat. Bishop goes back to b3 and d6, c3. c3 controls the d4 square, and it enables the pawn push to d4, supported by the knight, the queen, and to take control of the center. And it also offers a loft for the bishop on c2 square. h6 to take away the g5 square from the development of the bishop to g5 and have this nasty pin. Sorry about that arrow. Yeah, so it's very necessary to play that move. Rook to e1 and black castles. Okay, now plays enter the middle game phase, and in this position white plays the move knight to d2, knight bd2. And this maneuver you can see a lot in the Spanishes, especially the Ruy Lopez, where white develops this knight to d2 and this knight develops to f1, to g3, or even e3. So this knight on b1 ends up landing on these two squares through this maneuver. And from these two squares, they exert a lot of pressure in the center on the d5 and f on the f. Bishop back to b6 and knight to f1 as promised. So this is going to be a slow maneuvering game. Prague also goes for the maneuver of his own knight to the g6 square, and from g6 square the knight can land on the f4 square, and it will be a wonderful knight placed in the f4 square. And Ding attacks on the queen side and tries to soften up these pawn structures. And Prague plays this move rook to b8 in this position. It's necessary to play rook to b8 because if we place any other move after a takes b4, a takes b5, Prague cannot recapture the pawn because a rook on a1 can capture the rook on a8. So rook to b8 has to be played, and now this enables the capture of the pawns and h3. And if you look at the game, Ding Liren is just blitzing the moves out. The world champ is still in his preparation. But Prague is taking his time to figure out how to play this position, and Prague plays knight to g6, knight g3. So the knights are maneuvered to their respective squares, and c5. This takes more space and controls a lot of squares. And in this position, Ding played this move bishop to e3, and this bishop to e3 is an inaccuracy because this center can be easily collapsed by black, and Prague finds the best move, that is pawn to c4, which is a great move because you offer a trade of this bishop, but most importantly you just soften up these structures. And if this pawn is not there, that's the d3 pawn. The pawn on e4 may be weak in certain situation, and this opening of center is favorable for black. So let's say if white captures, it's a great position for black. After bishop e3, let's say rook takes e3 because you don't want to take with f pawn, and then after b takes e4, this is advantageous for black. And there is rook takes b2, and this rook is already on the second rank or the seventh rank, as you want to call it. So this c4 is a wonderful move, and bishop takes b6 is played, rook takes b6, and Ding retreats with the bishop back to a2. But the problem with this move is queen to c7, and this bishop is pretty much stuck. It cannot go, it cannot be in this diagonal, and if it were to come to this diagonal, it takes some moves, some tempos, and it's a waste of time. So that bishop is slightly stuck. So Ding tries to open up the position and plays bishop to b1 and remaneuvers the bishop. Pragg captures the pawn on d3, and after bishop takes d3, knight to f4. So the battle has been who's going to land this knight on the f5 or the f4 squares. I would like to call this. But black couldn't do this because there was a dark squared bishop which was on e3. So it could have captured the knight on f4 if it had landed over there. So now there is nothing to contest this knight on f4. While if white tries to put knight on f5, black will happily capture the knight and give up the light squared bishop for this knight, which will be on the f5 square. So yeah. So with this move, Pragg puts a lot of pressure on the king side and also threatens this bishop, light squared bishop. So if you are a advanced player, you know how important this light squared bishop is in Rui Lopez openings. What Ding does is plays knight to e2 and tries to take the knight, but he just left this bishop to be captured. The best. Okay, sorry about that bloopers. Oh, uh, one wrong click, and yeah, okay, we end up here. Okay, after knight to e2, this bishop is left hanging. But the best move for white is to go bishop f1 and preserve the bishop. You know, if you're a good Ruy Lopez player, you know you'll tuck this bishop back to f1, and this bishop serves an integral role in the king's safety of the king, and it also pressures the queen side. So this bishop is wonderful. But Ding has some other ideas and played knight e2 and offered this bishop so easily. So Pragg just captures the bishop, okay? And after queen takes d3, black is better. Black is a touch better than white. And bishop to e6, knight to g3, b4. Trying to soften up these structures, and once the pawn is traded, white will be left with only one pawn, that is the b2 pawn, and it will be an uphill task for white to actually defend this pawn. So right now the material is equal, but to defend this pawn on b2 it takes enormous effort, and I mean it's impossible to actually defend that pawn because Pragg will easily put a triple stack and just pressure that, or the Alhain's gun, as you want to call it. So after rook a to d1, rook back to b6, queen to a3 is another inaccurate move. So the best move would have been like uh, playing rook to c1, attacking the queen, making it move somewhere else and take control of the c file. But queen to a3 is played. Pragg plays rook to b8, pressuring the b2 pawn. Rook to d2 defends the pawn laterally. And what beginners this is, they put their rooks like this. Never do this. This is a good tip to know. Let's say you are in this case like this. You want to defend this pawn with a rook. You should always try to defend it laterally. You should not put your rook behind your pawn passively. But actually putting the rook behind the pawn is better in endgames to push your passed pawn, but not to defend a pawn. If you want to put your rook like this, it should be in the endgame. If you put your rook like this, I mean, this rook is literally stuck. At least if it is on d2, there is some mobility for this rook. It just presses at least the d6 pawn. But if you put it like this is a terrible case. So, beginners, if you're watching, make a note of it and don't do like that. So, Ding plays rook to d2 and knight back to e8, and this defends this pawn on d6 so that this rook can never capture that pawn, and this queen is free to move, and yeah, the pieces can do their own jobs, and this knight can serve the integrity of the center. Rook to h2, rook to b3, hitting the queen, so the queen retreats to a1, queen to b6, as promised. There's a triple stack. So knight back to f1, and the b2 pawn is lost. So right now, Praggnanandhaa is up a pawn, trades, everything is traded. Queens are traded, a pair of rook is traded, and knight to e3, g6, taking away the f5 square. Now g6 is not a weakening move because there is no equity for white to take control of those dark squares, and there is no attack on the king side. Rook to a1, trying to get the rook active and trying to place the rook on the 7th rank and put some pressure. But Prague says, no, you're not getting active. I'm just blocking your activity of this rook, and let's trade rooks. That's cool. h4 is played, and h5, stopping the advance of the flank pawn, because maybe if some other move is played, h5 leads to unnecessary complications. So Prague plays h5 himself, f3, and rook to b1 check, trading up another rook, and now players reach this endgame where white has two knights, but Praggnanandhaa has a knight and a bishop, which is a slight advantage in endgames because bishops are slightly better than knights in endgames, and Prague is also up a pawn. But actually, Stockfish could hold this position a draw, but it's very difficult for a human to actually hold a draw. Knight back to e2. The way you hold a draw is you want to trade all your pawns. Okay, you have four pawns, right? You trade all the pawns, and black will be left with one pawn and two pieces, and you will be having two pieces. And in this position, you trade one of the pieces. Maybe let's say you trade a knight for a knight, and when the case is a knight versus a bishop and a pawn, you sacrifice this knight for that pawn, and black cannot checkmate you with a single bishop. So that's how you make a draw. But it's very far in the future. That's the concept behind this endgame. But let's see what happens. Bishop a2, king to f2. Both the players bring their kings towards the center because king activity plays a major role in the endgames. And this tries to take control of the d5 square, bishop to b3, and knight to d5. And Prague actually gives his bishop because you reach this knight endgame where in knight endgames it's easy to win if you're up a pawn. You just you just have to be sure, make sure to not trade too many pawns. You have to have enough pawns on the board, and your goal is to trade knights, and you will reach a king and pawn endgame, which will be always winning. Always winning in the sense almost 99% of the cases, a side with the extra and a king and pawn endgame will win. So that's the meta. f5 is played, taking more space, and f4. This is one more inaccuracy in this position because in this position, white had to be patient and should be waiting with his king, maybe moving his king or bringing the knight back to e3 and maneuvering. So that would be better, because if knight to e3 and if black takes, still this one pawn holds these two pawns. There is no pawn to d5 because white will take and it will be a draw. So that that's what white has to play, but white tries to hit the center, and now black is completely winning this endgame. So let's see how Pragg converts the endgame. King f7, pawn takes, takes, and a spidey sense should see these two pawns clamp down the g4 square, and this pawn cannot go there, and this pawn has no activity, and this can only go to g3. That's what white plays, and if you look at this position, white has no pawn activity and no pawn play, and black is the one calling the shots. So white has to simply maneuver his knight. Black brings the king, brings the knight, brings the knight, puts pressure on g3, makes this f4 knight passer, pawn to f4, trades, creates a passer. King comes to get the pawn, but you just go there, defend your pawn, you remaneuver your knight, trying to pressure the h4 pawn. You bring your king in, and this endgame is going to be lost because you can even maybe play this, but it's too early to do that. But the matter is, you will win this pawn, and you will eventually push this pawn and the h pawn simultaneously, and you will win. If it were to be only one pawn, let's say black didn't have the h5 pawn, and black has only the f4, then this is a draw because white can sacrifice the knight for the pawn. It's winning because that pawn is lost, and you defend the pawn, you check, force the king to move away, you push the pawn as promised. You push both the pawns, and also you bring your king and try to trade knights at all times and force this king to move away from blockading the pawns. So you check, push the king back, bring your king, and this is a winning move because after knight to e4, Liren, the world champion, resigned the game, and this is a classical time format. And why Ding resigned is because if knight to d1 were to be played, then there is h3 and it's difficult to stop both the pawns. So knight to h1 has to be played, and when knight to h1 is played, there is knight to g3, forking the king and the knight, and white has to capture. And after captures, I mean, this endgame, anyone could win. This is completely winning for black. So after knight to e4, Ding Liren resigned the game. And with this win for Praggnanandhaa is now the India number one player in live ratings, overtaking Vishy. And with this victory in this classical time format, this made Praggnanandhaa the only player after Vishy to beat a reigning world chess champion, that is a current world chess champion, in a classical time format, which only Vishy did from India. So yeah, that is that is sensational. And the good news is Pragg is playing the candidates tournament, and I hope Pragg will win the candidates tournament and will challenge Ding Liren in the world championship. And I hope Pragg will be a world chess champion anytime soon. All the very best for Praggnanandhaa, and thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to the channel and share it to a friend. Like the video. Bye bye.